what happened in Uttar Pradesh with the mosque survey and the violence that happened later. There are legal stalwarts who've said that this is because of what happened with the Ayodhya judgment. There's a bearing that happens, like it may not, but then judges will get affected, won't they?
Obviously, judges across the spectrum have to understand that they are here to decide in terms of the law. And if there is a particular law which they have to apply, then they have to apply that law. And if there is an error on the part of a judge, that's capable of correction by a higher court.
When you said, I pray to a deity for a solution to the Ayodhya dispute. Now, uh, this was termed shocking, and that you asked for divine intervention.
I derive a great deal of comfort and solace from being a person who practices my faith. Your ability to do justice in court and in terms of the constitution, the law, does not depend on whether you are an atheist.
So he says the reality of India is that the opposition taken upon themselves to do the task of the media and the judiciary also.
People should not presume that the judiciary should be performing the role of the opposition in parliament or the state legislatures.
Is there political pressure on the Supreme Court?
No.
ये right wing judge है, ये left wing judge है. This is how people talk.
कहने वाले कहते रहेंगे.
Namaste, Jai Hind. You're watching or listening to another edition of the ANI podcast with Smita Prakash. My guest today is the former Chief Justice of India, Dhananjay Chandrachud. This is the longest podcast or interview that the Honorable Chief Justice has ever done, 2.5 hours. Justice Chandrachud served as the 50th Chief Justice of India from November 2022 to November 2024. He's also served as the Chief Justice of the Allahabad High Court and the Bombay High Court. He's been part of benches that delivered landmark judgments such as the Ram Janmabhoomi verdict, Article 370 special status of Jammu and Kashmir, decriminalization of homosexuality, same-sex marriage, and the Shiv Sena status. His tenure as Chief Justice of India also saw intense social media scrutiny over judgments, and there have been a spate of articles lately about the legacy he leaves behind. All this and more in the conversation. So, thank you so much, firstly, for coming to the podcast. How do I address you? That's a major, major thing. I've researched and everything. Do I say your lordship, your honor? How do I address a retired Supreme Court judge? I don't know.
I was uncomfortable about, lordship even when I was in office. So obviously that's completely out. And I think by my first name is fine.
No, my goodness, that's going to be impossible. But anyway, I just want to know, before we get into your judgments and all the controversies and all, I just want to know about how does it feel with retirement, and what are your retirement plans?
Well, actually, retirement isn't easy because I've been doing nothing else apart from working as a judge for 24 years. And suddenly you realize one morning that there are no files to be read for the next day. And then you get up in the next morning and realize that there's going to be no going to court and sitting there, which has been part of life for all these years. But then after the first couple of days, you sort of breathe the air of freedom in the sense that, any judicial office comes with so much of restraint, responsibilities, the routine, the isolation from society because of, the kind of post which you occupy, whether as a judge of the High Court or Chief Justice of the High Court or judge of the Supreme Court. So in that sense, I've been enjoying just the ability to meet people, go out on my own, visit bookstores, and of course a little more time to listen to music and do all the things which I have really missed out in the last 24 years.
Isolation, if I may ask? Aren't judges very social people?
No, judges, actually, it's to the contrary. At a certain level, well, you see them social in the sense that they'll attend legal aid clinics or they'll go to law schools to talk to students. But deep down, you're really very, very isolated because you don't make new friends as a judge. That's at least the policy which I followed. So the only friends which you have are old friends and friends which you make on the bench, colleagues you come close to. But then as a Chief Justice, there's another restraining factor which is that you have to be equal in all your colleagues. So you cannot have favorites among colleagues as well. So, all in all, life as a judge is really very different from being outside. You have to be connected to society in the sense you have to understand what's happening on the ground. Otherwise, you can't
Right.
decide cases. But at a personal level, the number of people you associate with, the kind of people you associate with, is you have to take so much of care
Mm.
because they possibly could be a connect with the case you are deciding. Someone may have an interest. I'm not saying that you start with the presumption that people want to make friends with you only because you're a judge, but this is something instinctive which comes to every judge.
So now, what would you like to do? Like, I know music and interaction, all that, yes, but would you like to go back to the teaching profession? Because I've met some of people who've attended lectures of yours, and they say it's you're mesmerizing as a teacher. And of course, Harvard would love to have you back, I'm sure.
Well, actually, I haven't honestly decided because I just thought that the last few months before I demitted office
So,
was so hectic because there were judgments to complete. There were various other lectures to deliver, projects to be completed in the Supreme Court and elsewhere. I was working extensively for the E Committee of the Supreme Court. So, all in all, it was a very hectic time for me.
mm,
On sane advice, both at home and among close friends, I'm just taking some time off. I think at least for a couple of weeks or maybe a month or so.
mhm,
Which is not to say that I'm not doing some work. There's a little bit of work which is coming my way as well,
mm,
professional work, which is wonderful because that gets me an opportunity to interact with youngsters, particularly young professionals, both in the law and beyond.
mm,
Something which I've missed doing all these 24 years.
mm.
But I don't want to be just a former judge who's an arbitrator or
Okay.
doing consultancy work. I have other interests as well, and I want to teach. I would, of course, like to be connected to the younger people in our society because I think that's where India is moving. The,
Mm,
the, the future and the present, for that matter,
mm,
is of the young. There's a demographic shift in our society, and I'm enormously inspired when I talk to young people, whether they're my own judicial law clerks, youngsters who come and meet me. So that's something which I'm really looking forward to doing, which is to
mm.
mentor the young in whichever way I can. I don't want to be sound pompous by saying that I'm capable of mentoring young people, but I'd like to spend as much of my time as possible teaching young people.
So you and I live in the same city where we are breathing this poisonous air, and most people that you will speak to, they just have lost hope that anything will be done by our lawmakers, and they just feel that it's now final court of appeal. It's up to the Supreme Court to do something about the matter. They pin their hopes only on the court. What do you have to say on this matter?
Well, it's great that people have this kind of faith in the court system. But I think when we deal with issues such as pollution in Delhi, the fact that everybody's talking about it for a change in the
Hmm.
last several years is part of the answer to the problem. Because the real problem arises when people just accept whatever happens in society as a new normal and they don't speak about it, they don't write about it, they don't talk about it. The very fact that everyone is engaged on this issue itself is the first step in finding a solution to this
But
problem.
it's a very pressing issue, right?
It
It's
is, of course.
so, writing about it, reporting is something that everybody has been doing for a long time. It somehow doesn't move people enough.
Now, the point is that there are two different aspects of the matter. First, you have the role of policymakers, namely the government, the expert agencies of the government. Then you have the role of the courts. None can, in that sense, be complete without the other.
Hmm.
When courts step into this area, obviously courts cannot take over the core policy making role, which is for expert agencies to handle. What courts can ensure is to ensure that the processes are being undertaken.
Hmm.
Are you applying your mind to this? For instance, we had the graded action plan. Now, that was introduced as a result of the intervention of the court, in the sense that then we lay down processes and systems that if pollution crosses a certain level, these are the steps which you have to take. And that's right.
Yeah, the
So you
grab one, grab two, and all those. Yeah.
institutionalize processes, and the response to
Hmm.
pollution does not become ad hoc.
But do you think it's time to have more judicial intervention? Otherwise, somehow the legislature and the executive seems to be doing They don't understand the urgency of the matter, probably. I don't understand.
Well, I would love to say yes,
Yeah.
because I've been a judge all my
Yeah.
life, as especially after I ceased to be a lawyer for the last 24 years. But having been a judge, I also understand the limits of a
Yes,
judicial review,
I get that.
and it's very important for judges to understand the limits of their function. Because what happens very often is that when you step into a problem, particularly a problem as complex as this, which is not a problem relating to one source of pollution, like say one thermal power plant
Mm.
or one polluting industry, those are typically areas which courts can work on very well. But
Right.
you are dealing with a problem which has multi-dimensional issues involved. You have farm fires, you have the number of vehicles in the city, you have new construction, you have changes in cropping patterns, climate change in general as
Yeah.
well. So these are issues in that sense which are extraordinarily complex. Courts have to step into the
Yeah.
area, move the authorities along, and tell them, hey, what are you doing? What are the steps that you are taking to
Mm.
deal with today's problems? What are you envisioning for the next year? What steps do you want to take? So very often the role of judicial review is to push things along as opposed to merely taking decisions on your own. Another problem I think which we need to understand is that when courts take decisions, we are essentially not accountable to the people
Mm.
in a direct sense. Obviously we are accountable to the constitution as judges, and pardon me for saying we, I'm no longer a judge,
Mm.
but just old habits die hard. But so courts are not in that sense either accountable to the electorate or to the people at large. We, as judges, they perform roles of enforcing constitutional rights. Now, a lot of good work in the environmental area in India has been done by the judiciary. I'll just take you away a little bit from the immediate issue of pollution. So, doctrines such as the polluter pays principle, or the principle of sustainable development, the precautionary principle, the principle of intergenerational equity, which means that we hold the environment in trust for future generations. The right to be protected against climate change, which I spoke of in one of my recent judgments on solar power. These are all the result of judicial evolution. And the Supreme Court of India has been at the forefront of global Supreme Courts in leading the march of environmental law.
Mm.
So, at a conceptual level, courts have a wonderful and a significant role to play. When it comes to dealing with individual problems, I have some element of caution which I must
Okay.
express,
Mm.
because otherwise, what happens is when courts enter into the area, there's a great expectation of people that, well, now the court has entered this area, you have this great power of contempt, and that everything will be normal and everything will be fine. It's not going to happen that way, because these problems are extraordinarily complex. You're dealing with intractable problems. You're dealing
Mm.
with the issues of farmers, right? The farm fires, for instance. Now, are courts capable of dealing with the complexity of these modern problems? Which is not to say that courts should not enter into the area. We have to enter into the area.
Whether it is Yamuna pollution, whether it is the air pollution, every time people of this city complain to the local government, they say, "Ye LG ka kaam hai." You complain to the LG, and he says that the state government doesn't do it. And then there is the central. This overlapping of Delhi. We are orphans, Delhiites. Does one go to? What is the solution to this issue of Delhi?
Delhi is the national capital territory. Now, when Delhi was given statehood, it was given statehood with a difference. Uh, in all other states, the legislative jurisdiction is distributed in three lists of the constitution. So, any other state in India, uh, there are three lists of the constitution: the union list, on which parliament can exclusively legislate; the
State
state list, in which the state legislatures can legislate; and the
concurrent.
concurrent list, in which both can legislate, but parliament has the overriding
Hmm.
prerogative to even override a law which is enacted by the state legislature, unless it has been reserved, unless the state law has been reserved for the assent of the president. So if
Hmm.
the president assents to a state law, then it can prevail to that extent even over a parliamentary
Hmm.
legislation. So far as Delhi is concerned, though it is a state with a legislature, the constitutional position is a little different in the sense that Parliament has the power to legislate on all the three lists in relation to Delhi. So Parliament can legislate on the parliamentary list, the union list, it can legislate on the concurrent list, it can also legislate on the state list. Second, certain specific subjects in the state list are carved out of the jurisdiction of the
Hmm.
legislature
Hmm.
of the National Capital Territory. So in that sense, Delhi is what we in law we call sui generis, which is unique. It is a state, but it is not a full state in that
Why didn't you
sense.
resolve this issue when you were the Supreme Court Chief
Well,
Justice?
there are two judgments of NCT. The first, of which I was a part, where Chief Justice Deepak Mishra was the Chief Justice, that was NCT 1. The second, where I was the Chief Justice of India, which was the second.
Hmm.
And now there is a third, which is pending before the Supreme Court, which of course will have to be dealt with by a
How does
constitutional
Washington
bench.
D.C. resolve it? Isn't that also a similar kind of a situation?
You know, our distribution of legislative powers is very different
They also have
because
Maryland, Virginia state, and then they have
right.
that.
So it's like it's very loosely. It is
Hmm.
similar to a national capital territory, but the national capital territory which we have in the form of Delhi
Hmm.
is governed by a very different constitutional
Okay.
distribution of powers.
Uh,
And the reason for it is while Delhi was conferred with statehood, certain subjects which would have a bearing on, say, the national character of the NCT
hmm.
were reserved for the union,
Hmm.
like police, land. These are two very critical areas which
Yeah.
were, in that sense, reserved for the center.
Hmm.
By the constitution itself, when the constitution was amended to create the statehood for Delhi.
See,
But
so
having
the reason when you say that we are not, it's like people have to expect more probably from our lawmakers. What happens is that now that we can see there's direct telecast, so we can see what's happening in the courts. People tend to expect it from the judiciary too. You get that?
yeah,
So it's like it's when we started watching parliamentary proceedings
right,
when they became live, it was more like, oh, I know this guy, he's from my area, he's
absolutely,
so somehow the mystique of that, the judiciary performing in some closed rooms, that's gone now. And then now you're looking at the lawyers and you say, he didn't represent me right,
right.
me in the sense citizen of India. So that's happening a lot, that's changing. But anyway, let me come to that later. I will come to you, when you said that, I need to ask you about, are you concerned, worried about how the people are going to look at your tenure? Because I will quote here, you said, how will history judge my tenure? Could I have done things differently? What legacy will I leave for future generations of judges and legal professionals? So were you thinking about this all through your tenure, or was it just the last couple of weeks?
Well, just the last couple of weeks, I don't think I ever thought of how people would look at a particular case that I decided. You look at that case, you look at the body of law which governs the case, the facts of that case, and you just decide it.
Hmm.
You decide it because you're duty bound to decide it in a particular way. When I spoke about my legacy and how people would look at it, it was more a moment of introspection because that's something which you do as a judge all the time. When you decide a case and you go home, you ask yourselves, uh, could I have done it differently? When I went home every day from work, and suppose there was a very hotly contested case, and I tried to control the course of the dialogue in a particular way, I'd always ask myself, could I have done it differently as a judge? So this is part of this process of judging, that
Hmm.
you're constantly questioning yourself when you are deep down within, alone to yourself and your own thoughts. So I'm sure this is something which I'll speak about, to myself. It's a conversation which I'll have with myself throughout my life.
Did you do this when you were done with Allahabad, when you were done with Bombay as High Court
I think
judge?
it's also a product of age. When I was a judge of the Bombay High Court, I was much
You were
younger.
younger, yes.
I became a judge at the age of 40. I was asked
Uh,
to become a judge when I was just 38 years old.
huh.
And when I went to the Allahabad High Court, I was just 53. when I got off the railway station, I took the overnight Duronto. People were looking for me. They didn't realize that I was the person who was to take chief officers, chief justice that morning.
But that's a big
Uh,
decision, right? Like
yes,
at such a young age to decide to be a judge. I mean,
yes,
of course, it might have been offered, but it's still to take that decision to
yeah.
be a judge, leave being a lawyer of repute.
Honestly, I decided right away that I'm going to accept this offer of judgeship when Chief Justice M.B. Shah, who was my Chief Justice then, judge from Gujarat, and later went to the Supreme Court, asked me to become a judge of the High Court. But interestingly, I must share this with you. I accepted judgeship at 38, and then my appointment was not coming for 2 years. And one day I walked to Chief Justice Y.K. Sabharwal with a letter written by me and my colleague, Justice Sharad Bobde, who was asked to be judge at the same time.
Hmm.
And we both had a conversation and we agreed that please let me go because there's too much going on in my own personal life and I just like to lead my own life. Not that I'm concerned about earning more money or just
Hmm.
the allure of being a lawyer, but just this uncertainty and the fact that my wife was suffering from cancer and I was her sole caregiver at that point of time. We had two small children.
Your sons
My sons, yes. The two girls came into our life much
later.
later.
Hmm.
And Chief Justice Sabharwal said, he said, Beta, these are very important constitutional offices and you can't just change your tack like this. Then I told him what the issue was. And he said, okay, come to me next week. I'm
Hmm.
going to Delhi this coming week and I'll talk to the Chief Justice of India, the law minister, and say that two of these people want to pull out.
Hmm.
And he said, if I can't give you some light at the end of the tunnel in a week,
Hmm.
then your way is the highway. And he came back from Delhi in 2 days and said, well, your appointment is on the anvil. You're going to be appointed. The warrant of appointment is coming next week. And that's how both of us, Justice Bobde and I, stayed on. And as it
The
so happens, both of us became
see,
Chief
Chief
Justices
Justice
of
of India,
India.
right? But didn't you ask your dad for his opinion on this matter? Like, what was his advice? He was also Chief Justice, longest serving Chief Justice.
He was, in a sense, he was happy when I accepted judgeship, but he said that the call is yours because he told me a lot of people outside would look at the not the glamour exactly, but the responsibilities which are entrusted to a judge, but it's a hard grind, and only someone who's been in the system for 24 years knows what a hard grind it is.
You've seen that. You were
uh,
the only child of your
I have a
parents.
sister.
You have a sister, sorry, huh?
Yes, and
But you've
so
seen that hard grind that your dad
but
went
I
through, right?
had and I hadn't because judgeship was very different when my father was in office.
Mm.
You didn't have the complexity of the law, the volume of litigation which has now come into our courts, the pressures of just the volume of caseload which every judge has to deal with. And apart from that, just the new areas of law which have come, the intense scrutiny on judges as a result of social media, all of this was not there. So interestingly, when I asked my father about whether I should withdraw, he looked at me and said, I think you're right. You need to withdraw because it's a decision for you. You have to live your decision all your life.
Mm.
Nobody else lives your decisions, and especially something like this. Once you're a judge for life, in the sense, even if you retire at 62 or 65, people still think that you are a judge in the
Mm.
sense that they look upon you with that sense, the sense of expectation of respect.
Mm.
And so he was completely with me when I decided to withdraw my
Okay.
candidature, which also was a little reminder of the fact that the collegium system can sometimes be have produced these results. I mean, had I pulled out,
Huh.
I don't know whether the system would have been good or worse.
Okay,
But
so
that's
now
the
that you've
point.
come to
Yeah.
these 2 points, which I want to on the collegium system and on the social media part, let's go on to the social media part first, and then I will come to the collegium part. When you retired, after that, you've said this. जजों को ट्रोलिंग से बहुत सावधान रहना चाहिए. ट्रोल्स कोर्ट के फैसले को बदलने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं. Now this is a new phenomenon that has happened. The
Yes.
the the social media impact, like I said, the direct telecast. So one immediately, even Kapil Sibal had said that in the recent Calcutta
Right.
case, the rape case, where he said that we are being demonized because he was representing the government, the West Bengal government. He says we're being demonized on social media. To what extent are judges, if they are on social media, to what extent do you feel they're influenced by these media trials which are being held?
Well, as a matter of fact, I know that speaking for myself, I'm not on social media. And I dare say all the judges of the Supreme Court, none of us is on social media. But obviously, you tend to look at YouTube and, you
Mm.
look at some of the websites which have to deal with the law. But there is this new normal which has emerged, which is that constantly, the social media is being used to affect the way a case would proceed in court. Now, when we took the decision to live stream court proceedings, and I stand by that decision, I think live streaming of our court proceedings, as you just said a little while back, has truly taken the work of the Supreme Court to the homes of people.
Yeah.
They realize the seriousness with which problems of the moment, problems of the day are taken. Even small cases like a motor accidents case, where someone fell off, say, a farm tractor and died, or a small thing, seemingly small case like that, occupies so much of time of the court on whether the parents of a deceased should be given 7 lakhs compensation or 10 lakhs compensation. We deal with these cases very seriously. So in that sense, I feel that live streaming has truly enhanced the credibility of the work of the Supreme Court of India, because people see what seriousness goes into the decisions of not those big ticket constitutional cases only, but every little case, somebody's land which has been acquired, for a public project, somebody's partition suit, so on and so forth.
But it's also on language which is used. I mean, for example, Izzat Lutna is not the right thing to say when
Right.
it is rape. Where these sensitive things where you do say, turn around and say that, use the word,
Absolutely.
because, and don't make it a question of honor has been, luta hai
Oh,
and things.
absolutely. But, in
Yeah.
fact, we recently, before, this work actually began during COVID,
Mm,
when the work of the court was not of the same
mm,
intensity as normal. So we brought out this gender handbook, because I found that in a lot of discourse concerning women, the words which are used particularly to describe women who are victims of violence are extremely pejorative. For instance, a woman who is in a relationship is referred to, or was referred to, as
concubine.
concubine. A woman who was raped, they would say she was ravished, or they would say that the
Ravished, not
ravished,
ravaged.
no, ravished,
Ravished.
ravished. Then another word which was used was that the act of rape brought shame
Mm.
and deprived
Dishonor.
dishonor to the family.
Yeah.
So the reason why I thought we should come out with this gender handbook was to tell people why, people in the sense, decision makers, lawyers and judges particularly, and then the outside world, why are these phrases wrong? Why is rape is an offense, and rape is morally and fundamentally legally wrong, because of the fact that it involves the violation of the dignity of that human being, of
Mm.
that woman. It amounts to breaching her own personal autonomy.
In fact, this was quoted in Europe and in America also,
Yes,
when regarding termination of pregnancy and those
absolutely.
kind of judgments
Yeah.
which came out from the Supreme Court were quoted also there.
So we, in the gender handbook, we have sort of given alternate phrases. We have sort of explained why these phrases are not acceptable in contemporary